Hi, my name is Liz and you're watching Bits of Information. Today I want to talk to you about rule of thirds. It's one of the simplest and more useful rule of composition. Composition of images, it might be photos, videos, paintings, websites, anything you want. The name rule of thirds first was given by John Thomas Smith in his book Remarks on Rural Scenery in 1797. John Thomas Smith was also known as Antiquities Smith. He was an English painter, engraver, and antiquarian, and he was a keeper of prints at the British Museum. We will come back to him later, but now let's actually look at what rule of thirds is. It works for any image. It might be a square, a rectangle, a vertical portrait one, or a horizontal landscape one. For an example, let's take a horizontal landscape picture. And this is a rectangle that we have here. Let's divide this rectangle into thirds. 3 equal vertical parts and 3 equal horizontal parts. So I drew a grid on top of this image. If I want my viewer's attention to be drawn to a particular point in this image, I place this object, in my case it's a yellow circle, on top of this grid. Here my yellow circle is in the top horizontal line and the right vertical line. Let's take away the grid for a second and notice how our attention works with this image. When you look at this image first, your attention travels from left to right, notices the circle, thinks, circle, interesting. And then you briefly scan the image, the background of this image, before coming back to the circle. And this is pretty much the magic of rule of thirds. If you place your main character on top of the grid, in any cross-section of any lines, the viewer's attention will gravitate to this point. Don't take my word for it, let's look at an image of, let's say, a squirrel. This was a lovely fluffy squirrel that I once met at the park. If we draw our grid on top of the squirrel image, we can notice that the squirrel is entirely on the vertical line, but also the squirrel's head is kind of on the horizontal line as well, and her eye is almost at the cross-section of the vertical and the horizontal. And also the squirrel's tail is on the top horizontal line. When you look at this image, you look at it from left to right, you notice the squirrel, then you briefly scan all the stones and the needles in the background, and then you come back to the squirrel. You can use this with framing any video shots. Right now, my shot is also guided by the rule of thirds. The lamp is here on the vertical line, and I'm also not in the center, but I'm to the third, to kind of create visual interest. And I hope I'm interesting. So let's come back to Antiquities Smith for a little bit and see what he wrote about the rule of thirds. For example, in a design of landscape, to determine the sky at about 2/3 or else at about 1/3, so that the material objects might occupy the other two. And we can see how he implemented his own idea in an engraving of a blind beggar that he did. This is the image, and then let's, on top of it, lay our grid. And we can notice that the dog that guides the beggar is entirely in the lower third. The beggar himself is in the third. Two other people in this image with their backs to us, they occupy the 2/3, and also the architectural little bit where the two walls meet, it's also on the vertical third. Here, probably in this image, he went a little bit too far because the beggar himself is not centered on the vertical line of the grid. He kind of almost is entirely on the left. And that's sometimes maybe taking it a bit too far because he's too close to the edge of the image. But this still works. Generally, I would suggest to you placing your objects right in the middle of the vertical or horizontal line to use this rule even more to grab more attention. But the thing is, okay, so right now we looked at several examples of images with rules of thirds. But what if you ignore those rules? Maybe anywhere you place an object will still grab your attention or not. Let's look at our same rectangle, but now let's place our famous yellow circle in the middle. What you might notice here is that your attention straight away goes to the circle, and that's it. You don't want to scan the background behind it. You just look at the yellow circle, you get the idea, and you're done. Let's compare it with our circle in the thirds. You see, to get to this circle, your eye has to travel through the image. Then it gets to your circle, looks at it, and then scans the background and returns back to the circle. There's much more action of your attention when the circle is in the grid of thirds. Also, rule of thirds is the reason why a lot of cameras, probably all the cameras, when you turn the option of showing the grid, this grid actually represents rule of thirds to help you find the thirds easier. Let's look at several more images and find the thirds there. Here's a little bottle. So this bottle is on the vertical third, and also the center of the circle of the bottle is on the horizontal third. A guy playing squash. So his head is in the vertical and the horizontal third. His body, most of his body, is on the vertical third. And the racket that he holds is in another thirds. So when you look at this image, your eye travels from the racket that he holds along his arm to his head, then you look at his figure, and then you scan the background because there are some lines, like red lines painted on the background. And then you come back to the guy, and then to the racket. A picture of a bridge. Again, the closest vertical beam that there is on the bridge is on the vertical third. Also, the city that is far from us and the bit of the road that is closest to us, they're all in the lower third, and all the sky is in the upper two thirds, creating even more visual interest there. What you need to get about the rule of thirds is it's called a rule, but actually it's more of a guideline. Rules of composition are not there to force you to do this thing. They're here to create a guideline for you, and you definitely can break those rules. But I think the important bit in breaking those rules is not just, I'm gonna break them for fun. You kind of, when you're breaking them, you have to have a certain reason why. You might want your viewer to feel a little bit uncomfortable or unsettled. Or some other thought or emotion that you can evoke from your viewer by breaking certain rules. There is a big difference in knowing the rule and consciously breaking it, and not knowing the rules and breaking them because you don't know. Because when you know the rule, you break it for a reason. And this is an artistic reason. You want your viewer to feel something different. If you don't know the rules and you break them, almost always when it happens, it's just uncomfortable. It's just, you don't want your viewer to feel unpleasant, and yet they might feel this way just because you accidentally broke the guideline. Okay? So you should break the rules, but only when you have a reason why. If you don't like calling it rule of thirds, be free to call it a guideline of thirds. Also, this is not the only thing when talking about composition. There are other rules or guidelines, and in later videos I will talk about them. But honestly, even if you master just the rule of thirds, it will bring your work to the new level. You can actually go back, look at the photos or videos that you made before, and just try to notice, did you follow this rule unconsciously or didn't you? And if you didn't, try cropping the same images so that now they follow this guideline. And then look at the before and after and try to analyze, did something change for you? Did rule of thirds make your image better? And again, it doesn't have to make it better. Just notice it, ask the question, does rule of thirds here help you or not? So try several images that you did before, crop them differently, and notice how you feel about it. I will leave you with this quote from our friend Antiquity Smith. In applying this invention, generally speaking, or to any other case, whether of light, shade, form, or color, I have found the ratio of about 2/3 to 1/3, or of 1 to 2, a much better and more harmonizing proportion than any other proportion whatever. Thank you so much for watching this video. Hope this was helpful and interesting. Bye! See you in the next video.